Kia ora Internet
Hello and welcome.
to our special Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori session.
Nice pronunciation there, Hemi.
Thank you, Kara.
Well, I have to apologise in advance for any strange noises you may hear. We're recording upstairs and our bunny rabbits live upstairs, so you might hear them drinking or
Hopping around and
chewing things. We're just taking a sort of... I was going to say this is a bit of a break,
breather.
bit of a breather episode, but I mean we're going to get a bit heated.
There's a few
We're going to get a bit heated.
nice topics in this one.
It's
but
not as meaty as last time, and
not as meaty as what we're hoping to have for next time.
yeah, exactly. So we'll try and keep it relatively calm this time.
Yeah. So this time we're going to go back to our formula of news and then our main topic that we're discussing, which is based on a request from one of our listeners. The request was for more mistakes that were made during role-playing games.
Yeah, roleplay fails.
Roleplay fails and what we have learnt from them. And so we've got a couple of examples there that we're going to talk about.
And then we'll cap it all off with some reviews. All right. Let's
so
head into the
let's
news.
start it. Shall we start off with... Should we start controversial or start
Ooh,
light?
hit me.
Okay. So the Adventurers League for Dungeons & Dragons has previewed the rules for races that are going to be featured in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything coming out later this year. And essentially what they say is that the racial rules and statistics that are presented are stereotypes of standard archetypes for the different Dungeons & Dragons races, and that PCs can assign their bonuses however they want. The PCs can swap their skills that they learn for whatever they want, and that they can pretty much customize their racial origins because they are unique individuals and not necessarily representative of their race.
So this is their response to... I was going to say our criticism, not specifically our
Not
criticism,
specifically
but
ours. Wouldn't
the
that be
criticism that
lovely?
we and many others have had about criticisms that we and many others had of their handling of...
Race.
Yeah.
The biggest criticism is still not addressed, which is the fact that the word race is based on erroneous assumptions in the first place.
Bad science.
And bad science, which is then used in bad faith by racist people.
Yeah, I have two other issues with this. I mean, that's the big glaring one is, for me, I would like Dungeons and Dragons to just get rid of the word race altogether. It is a sacred cow of the fantasy genre that doesn't need to stick around anymore. And what is my evidence for this? Well, where did it come from in the first place? From Tolkien. And The One Ring, which is the RPG book series
Based on The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
Yeah.
Does
They've got rid of the word
not
race.
use the word. You have a culture.
Yeah. Which is far more also historically accurate to Europe in the Middle Ages. Which is, where Tolkien got all of his inspiration from.
Yes. I understand that in the in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, the full system will be called lineage, but I don't think they're actually going to be getting rid of that word, race.
And that really disappoints me. So that's my first point. That's my first disappointment.
It also doubles down on the idea that races, I hope you can hear the inverted commas there, are all homogenous and alike, that there are set stereotypes in which every member is like, and that the PCs are just the exceptions.
Yeah, so that plays into exactly what I was about to say about the second thing I have a problem with. The use of the word stereotypes. Looking at the sort of negative space, what they're not saying around this, right, is that they're implying that stereotypes are a useful thing that you can use in your real life to analyse people by. The thing is that stereotypes aren't actually useful. When you're an adult, I think you need to set aside. Like, if you want life to be quick and easy, you're just being childish. When you're an adult, you need to be able to see the nuances in life, right?
But Claire, someone might say, surely you can see that there is a difference between stereotyping a real-world ethnic group and a fantasy imaginary group of, say, dwarves.
Sure, but by saying that something's okay in that context, other people will take it that it's okay to do in the general real world context.
And also, to knock apart my own deliberately set up weak point, a lot of the fantasy races, inverted commas,
are just lazy stereotypes of real world races.
Of real world
cultures. Yeah. Well, yeah, often dwarves are just a lazy stereotype look at Jewish people.
At Jews or Scots or sometimes Vikings.
And I've been guilty of this myself before. I've played
absolutely been guilty of this.
Scottish dwarves before. I'm sure everyone who's played D&D at some point has been guilty of it, because the stereotypes are so easy to play into. And
I agree with Dungeons and Dragons that archetypes can be very useful for new players. It can be very nice to know what sort of things should I be, and so having the archetypes are good, but an archetype and a stereotype
are not the same.
thing.
And let me point out something to sort of make it definitive for our listeners. So you might have the archetype of like a really, really talkative character, someone who's a real fast talker, blah, 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 blah. Just, that's their sort of main thing that they do. But if you were to stereotype people, a whole group of people, say, as really talkative, that's not the same thing. So here's a real world example. Women get told that they talk too much all the time, that they talk more than men. Men are stereotypically strong and silent, and women are just blah, 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 blah. But there have actually been numerous studies proving that it's actually the other way around, especially in business settings where it's quite easy to test for these things. Meetings often have a set start point and end point, so you can measure them more than necessarily people, in their living rooms sort of thing. But it was found that not only did the men talk way more than the women, but their opinions were listened to, given gravity, respect, whereas women were often interrupted. Their opinions were either cut down afterwards, or their opinions were absorbed. Stolen perhaps by the next male speaker.
I'm calling it like a Caesar.
Yeah.
Stolen.
So but nevertheless, the stereotype of women being overly talkative persists. You see jokes about, I just saw this horrible one of a father and son laughing, pointing at a mother and daughter with like duct tape over their mouths. What? And the father and son were holding up the sign saying peace at last.
What?
Yeah. It's so horrible, because that little girl is going to grow up with this thing in her head saying like, oh my God, am I talking too much? Do I need to be quiet now? She's going to feel like her opinions are not as important as the men in her life.
For another example, which is equally toxic and destroying for real cultures, there is the myth in New Zealand about Māori and the warrior gene, that they're just genetically predisposed to be more violent.
Yeah.
Which is just eminently and obviously not true.
It's fake science.
There is no history, there is no science, there's nothing to back this up. And it's just used as a way to ignore examining why people in a lower socioeconomic status have problems with domestic violence. And ignoring all the other causes and just being able to hand wave it away. And it's one that then perpetuates this harm, because people can use it to just go, they're just like that. They're just violent, and that they're less intelligent. Yeah. And so this is a really horrible, harmful stereotype.
We touched on all of this when we talked about orcs. But here's the thing, right? So, like, it's okay if you didn't know these things before us talking about them. Just be open, be an adult about it. Being an adult doesn't mean that, like, all your learning is done. You still get to learn.
You are always learning.
Yeah, we're always all learning new things. There will be a ton of stuff that I don't know is a stereotype that's in my head about other cultures. There will be tons of stuff because I'm a child of the 90s, so my brain will be filled with like fake information about other cultures around the world.
I was basically raised on 80s fantasy, so
so we just have to do our best.
Yeah.
And so that was my second point. So
Yeah.
I want the word race taken out. I want stereotypes to actually be addressed for what they are, which is not helpful. Archetypes helpful, yes. Stereotypes not actually helpful, often harmful. The third thing, it's the most minor one, but it sort of cuts to the very philosophy of D&D, which is the whole thing about your characters are exceptional individuals. And it's just like that is the core philosophy of D&D.
At some point we need to do a video about the connection between D&D and capitalism. Because D&D is an expression, really, of the American dream. The idea that you are an exceptional individual who is better than everyone else and can therefore do whatever you want as you make yourself into a better, richer, more powerful person through your own effort.
It's
we'll
meritocracy.
We'll talk about that another time.
So, we will talk about that another time, but that's just a little taster of it's very much American individualism as a philosophy underpins D&D, and that's something that I personally don't quite gel with, because we're all exceptional in our own ways. We're also all part of a community, and I think games like Pendragon sometimes remember that.
More and more I find myself getting frustrated with Dungeons & Dragons and admiring Greg Stafford's games like RuneQuest, like Pendragon.
Where you're much more part of a culture.
You are part of a culture, you are part of a group of people, and you are defined not just by your privileges that you get from your culture, but also your obligations towards your culture, the way in which you have to participate in your community.
And quite often I will hear people arguing against the arguments against individualism, going like, oh, you just want us to all be faceless drones. And it's like, no, there is a happy middle ground where you're an individual that's part of a community, and it's a much richer life than just this I am the pinnacle
purely
hero.
On your own.
And because nobody does.
No. So my other takeaways for the changes from this document. Firstly, good. It means that if you want to be a dwarf wizard, you can be. Great,
I look
fine,
forward to it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I've always hated how if you are playing a particular class, you immediately ignore every single race that doesn't give you a bonus to that. So the flexibility that it gives, wonderful, brilliant. My next thought, I think for 99% of players around the world, this will do absolutely nothing, and they will continue to use the bonuses that are written down.
Pretty much, people will keep playing with stereotypes. It's just.
I've heard people complaining about the saying that it makes all of the classes basically. It makes all of the races basically interchangeable, faceless, the same. You are now just. You might as well just be a human with pointy ears or a short human with a beard. To which I say that's what D&D races have always been.
That is actually very true, because in the player's handbook and stuff, you don't get any cultural or place.
Very short. Very
the
very
settings
short.
in D&D come separate from the rules. And that's an interesting thing about it, that it is different from most other role-playing games where the rules and the setting are intertwined.
And so therefore I don't mind if you are the smartest dwarf in the world, because the whole concept of what it means to be a dwarf is such a vague, nebulous thing in Dungeons & Dragons.
Yeah.
It's not like, once again coming back to RuneQuest, where I am 100% on board with there being actual real differences between a Sartarite human and a Mostali dwarf, where the dwarf is basically a living robot made out of metal as one part of the cog and the great machine of the world, with a completely alien mindset, physiology, culture, background. You are playing an alien being if you're playing a dwarf in that. Whereas in D&D, you're probably just playing a short Scottish person.
Human.
And my final takeaway from this, frankly, is I don't care.
Yeah,
that
sure.
there are people who have been accusing this as pandering. As the audience who is being pandered to, theoretically, I say, you're damn straight this is pandering. I don't really care whether I am 5% more efficient as an imaginary thing in an imaginary game. Given how the latest D&D book has largely been created by the people of colour who we've talked about leaving D&D in previous episodes, who have still going uncredited, whose work is not getting the recognition that it's due.
Yeah, you're right.
Don't
that sucks.
care.
That really sucks.
I don't care if your halfling is now 5% more effective at being a cleric. Make some actual actions.
Some actual change.
Some actual real world change towards how you treat people, and then I'll be interested.
Yeah, well done. I like that take.